So welcome everyone. We're so glad that you could join us today. So my name is Eileen Ryan. I recently started a local group of Beyond Plastics for people living in the greater Boston area. Plastic pollution has been a concern of mine for many years, and I was a member of a group in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is where I live, that passed a single-use plastic shopping bag ban in 2016. It went into effect in 2017. Last year, I took Judith Enk's excellent plastic pollution course at Beyond Plastics and became a trained public speaker on plastic pollution, which is where I met Dana. So Dana Ripper and I were in the same training course to become part of the Speakers Bureau at Beyond Plastics. And Megan Wolf, who is one of our guest speakers tonight, was our trainer. So we've spent a lot of time on Zoom together. And now Dana will introduce herself.
Thanks, Eileen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this evening. So I am based here in Missouri. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Missouri River Bird Observatory. And we were founded here in central Missouri in 2010, and we work throughout the state of Missouri and in some surrounding states. And our mission is the conservation of birds and all wildlife and their habitats via science, education, and advocacy. So I kind of came to the topic of plastics, and particularly single-use plastics, from the wildlife standpoint. I'm sure folks here have seen some of the horrific pictures of sea turtles and their plight with plastic, and birds such as albatrosses on very far-flung oceanic islands that are living amongst plastic waste. So that's kind of what got me into the topic, and the more I learned about it, the more I realized that it is definitely a global crisis from the beginning with fossil fuel extraction to the end where we have this horrible pollution problems throughout our planet. So over the past few years, my organization has become more and more involved in this topic. And one of the things that we did that is very much related to what we're talking about tonight is last year we took part in a Break Free from Plastic brand audit, actually a couple of them. It's an excellent way to collect data, and I'm going to hand it back to Eileen to talk a little bit more about Break Free from Plastic and their relationship to why plastics and the issue in general.
Yeah, so Dana and I coincidentally both requested access to these amazing films at the same time. So that's why we decided to do this presentation together. And don't worry if you haven't had a chance to see the movies yet. These links should be good until the 30th of June and probably longer. So the movies were co-produced by Break Free from Plastic Pollution and the Y Foundation. The Y Foundation is a nonprofit organization that produces and distributes documentaries about human rights, democracy, justice, and equality. And obviously, after watching these films, you know that plastic is a major environmental justice issue. So Break Free from Plastic Pollution, as Dana mentioned, does annual audits of plastic pollution around the world. And if you'd like to join an audit, if you're part of a group that already does an ocean cleanup or a river cleanup, I highly recommend that you participate in one of these audits. I have not done one yet, but Break Free from Plastic, this is their 5th year that they're collecting data, and it's really important in terms of persuading corporations and legislators to have 5 years worth of data on these corporate polluters. But this is one of the reasons why we know Coca-Cola is the number one polluter. All right, so now I'm going to give a little synopsis of each film in case you haven't had a chance to watch them, and we'll start with the Coca-Cola's Plastic Promises. So Coca-Cola's Plastic Promises highlights that when corporations aren't held accountable, they will not regulate themselves and make a lot of empty promises that are rarely fulfilled. Coca-Cola is the #1 contributor to plastic pollution around the world and produces 25% of all plastic waste. The company is also fully capable of producing 100% returnable and refillable bottles, either glass or plastic, as you learned in the movie. Coca-Cola also switched to plastic bottles in the early 1970s, knowing that it was a bad environmental decision and that it would put the responsibility and cost of disposal back onto taxpayers and municipal waste systems. So the second film is the recycling myth, and it highlights the false promises. You want to advance that slide, Dana? It highlights the false promises of the plastic packaging industry and illustrates the profound injustice of implying that plastic can and will be recycled. One of the most compelling stories included in the recycling myth is that Terracycle is landfilling and incinerating most of the plastic packaging that is sent to Terracycle. So there's a lot of greenwashing going on there. In addition, the recycling myth illustrates that disposal of plastic waste has become an illegal black market. And the third film is We, the Guinea Pigs. It is a profound expose on the human health consequences of living with so much plastic in our lives and the effects of the chemicals found in plastics. It focuses on the work of several scientists in Europe and the United States who have documented the deleterious effects of plastic on human health for decades. These scientists have been working for, since the 1980s and early 1990s to prove that plastic and the chemicals in plastics are linked to breast cancer, infertility, ADHD, and gender dysmorphia, just to mention the 4 that they highlight in the movie. And now I'm going to introduce our 2 special guest speakers. So Jan Dell is an independent chemical engineer and the founder of The Last Beach Cleanup, a nonprofit organization based in Southern California that works to reduce plastic pollution. Jan co-wrote a new report that reveals that the U.S. plastic recycling rate fell to between 5 and 6% in 2021. She co-wrote the report with Judith Enck of Beyond Plastics. Jan also successfully sued Terracycle last year. And to all of us, she's also a movie star and is featured in the recycling myth. So welcome, Jan. Megan Wolf is the policy director at Beyond Plastics. She holds both a master's and a doctorate in public health from Columbia University. Megan believes that climate change is the biggest threat to health and well-being, and that the overproduction of plastics touches on every aspect of the climate crisis. Megan joins us from her home in New Paltz, New York. Megan will address the health effects of plastics, many of which are outlined in We, the Guinea Pigs. Megan also, as I said, Megan already also trained me and Dana to be public speakers on plastic pollution. So welcome, Megan, welcome, Jan. And Jan, we will let you begin with addressing the issues that were brought up in Coca-Cola's plastic promises and the recycling myth.
Wonderful. Thank you all for this opportunity. Eileen, can you just remind me how much time I should use? Because I can go on this topic for a long time. About how many minutes should I give a synopsis of this?
I think, what do you say? 15 minutes or so to get started. And also, if you have any questions as you're listening to Jan or Megan, please put them into the chat and we will address questions at the end. We are actually planning for this to go for an hour and a half. So I hope that's okay with all of you. So go ahead, Jan.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I actually started really early this morning. At 5 a.m. there was a webinar because there is a big UN ocean conference happening in Lisbon, Portugal right now, an ocean conference dealing with the problems. It's a UN sponsored conference with the problems of plastic pollution. And there was actually a virtual panel around the world to that showed the recycling myth and clips of it, to talk about stopping export of plastic waste, which is proven to cause plastic pollution into the oceans. And so there's one main message that I gave in the recycling myth that I want to start with and end with, which is that the circular economy of plastics is the greatest greenwashing hoax of all time. Plastic is not recyclable. We are being lied to on a daily basis. We've been lied to for 30 years, and we're still lied to today that plastic is recyclable. And of course, now the California State Attorney General has launched an investigation into these fraudulent claims, and hopefully he'll get to the root of that evil and maybe be able to stop it. But this greenwashing hoax is so bad. I give a parallel to oil and gas, and some of these companies are part of this greenwashing hoax. But it's as if oil and gas has been telling us that the more oil and gas we use, the colder the climate will be. Okay, you know, now it's known, now they admit it. Yep, it's warming the planet. You know, you can say maybe years ago they tried to hide it, but certainly they've admitted it for the last 15 or 20 years. But the plastics and products industry, and including some of these petrochemical companies, the integrated oils, are completely lying about the recyclability of plastic. The very material itself, there's two problems that make it unrecyclable. Number one, the very material itself is a toxic material, which is a segue to we, the guinea pigs, right? And all these harms in it, okay? And they primarily talked about, I've watched part of it, but I believe they primarily talked about new plastics, right? And the harms of new plastics. Well, the potential toxic harms in recycled plastics are infinite. And the actual original Circular Economy of Plastics treatise from 2016 dismissed toxicity. I looked that report up yesterday. I found the sentence because I'm writing another big report with Greenpeace, which should be out in September, called Plastic Pledges Fall Flat, Companies Failing on a False Path. They so minimize this toxicity. They say, oh, if we can get the toxics out of a plastic cup, then it's all recyclable. But what the entire scam misses out on is that in the waste and recycling system are toxics, including malathion that comes in a PET bottle, okay? These PET bottles get mixed with beverage bottles in the same place. They go to a MRF, it goes to an optical scanner. There is no separating this. It doesn't matter if you've made your PET beverage bottle perfect with nothing in it. Toxics are in the real world. They're in plastics. And what makes plastics different than metal or glass or paper is that plastics absorb toxics. If you put this in the recycle bin with this that has a little bit of liquid in it that vaporizes it, this sleeps with this and is now a changed material. Think of a Tupperware that you put red spaghetti sauce in. It changes colors. Plastics absorbs chemicals. It's really hard to scrub that back out. By the same token, you can't do that in recycled plastic. So the number one thing is we are given a hoax. It is not a solution. They perpetuate it because they know we want to believe. We want to believe in the fairy tale of it. And it's just not true. We just published a report that shows the plastic recycling rate has gone down to like 5% in the US. It's gone down because we're not exporting anymore and we're not counting that. It's never been above 5%, which is basically some PET bottles, HDP bottles, and jugs. And to be clear, I think plastics have a role in life. We need them in hospitals. We need them in certain applications. If we were only talking about PET bottles and HDPE jugs, multi-use things, you know, your Windex container, even your Big Tide container, if that's all we were talking about, and someone said, are those recyclable? I'd say sure. But those are a very, very small percent of all the plastics. And the plastics industry and the retailer companies are telling us it's all recyclable. So it's not recyclable. And the second main message is they are lying to us in the US, and they are lying to us more and more every day. I'm going to show you an example that just blew my mind this weekend. Just when I think my mind can't be even more blown. But first, I'll tell you about the Terracycle case. So in 2018, I left my corporate day job of leading global clean energy for a big engineering company because I was going to have to go help ExxonMobil build a new polyethylene cracker. I said no. They said, fine, you're retired. And I started my own NGO to bring the facts out because in 2018, when this was all exploding and the plastics industry is saying we're going to build a bunch of new plants, so of course it's not recyclable if they're going to build a bunch of new plants, right? That's the second problem with plastics. There's so much new clean new cheap plastic, there's no reason to get the other plastic back. For cardboard and paper, we actually have to get it back. For aluminum, we have to get it back. They actually have to get it back to make new products. But no, with plastic, they want that burn. They want that to go away so they can sell us new plastic. So anyway, in 2018, I went off to some plastic recycler conference. I was actually kind of brainwashed the other way. I thought, you know what? I'm going to go help those plastic recyclers do a better job. They must need my help. So I went to 2 conferences, one in Nashville, one in Maryland, and I got there and I was blown away. Because what did I hear them all talking about? How do we export it? And I'm like, well, why aren't you going to build more factories? Why aren't you going to recycle this stuff? Oh, no, it doesn't make any money. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to export it and call it recycled. So my mind was blown. And I heard this group talking about how they were going to label everything, this how to recycle group, with these recyclable labels. But I said, wait a second, these cups aren't recyclable. EPA says none of these are recycled. And they're like, oh yeah, but we can put the label on it. So I was inside the tent hearing them lie about this. So I started going out to store shelves and looking at products on store shelves to see what when we were being told is recyclable, knowing full well that only PET bottles and HDPE jugs are actually recycled in America. And lo and behold, I found a bunch of these how to recycle labels, which I'm now beginning to sue. I'm taking these on. I'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I found these Terracycle labels. And this is the one that really got me. There's more. I have a whole bunch in the garage. If you watch the video, you saw my garage collection. Okay, so this chip bag that's made out of this plastic, which nothing can be made out of. None of these things that they're collecting have a use. You spent a ton of money. You could chop it up, put a whole bunch of new plastic, and then make it into a picnic table. Kind of like when you see a picnic table with little flecks of stuff in it. You know, you could do that with basically anything, including this, but you'd have to spend a ton of money, which Terracycle doesn't want to do. So instead, they find a way to secretly get rid of it. Okay, so they labeled all these things as recyclable, and I thought, where is this magic factory, right? I knew there wasn't. I'm a chemical engineer. I knew there was no factory recycling this. And so I said to my lawyer, a friend of mine, who had been leading the Keurig case, well, can we sue over that? And he goes, no, it's going to be really hard to prove. You know, it's really hard to sue, even though you're right. And then I went on the website because this said recyclable with Terracycle. And there were millions of these things being sold across the country, right? Late July snack packets. But I went on their website and I tried to register and I got put on a wait list. So how is that legal? They're telling us, huge label, oh, this is recyclable, but wait a second, I'm on sort of wait list. And I went on Reddit and found that people had been waiting years on a wait list. So I went back to my lawyer and he said, yeah, that's illegal. So we contact them with a pre-suit letter. That's what we say. We say, hey, what you're doing is illegal. You change that. And they said, no, because they've gotten away with it for 20 years. Well, ultimately we won and they've had to change their labels. And in fact, I'm happy to show you the new label that now is out. And this is a small symbolic victory, and yet it's a bigger victory. Because if someone like little me can make this impact and expose this charade, we can all do things together. I am not kidding you. Okay, so now late July now says new look. It doesn't say recyclable anymore because that's illegal to say. And way back on the bottom, I don't know why they're still using the Terracycle program, probably because they have a contract they're renting out. Down in little letters, it says limited participation. All right. So we've gone from this to this. This is what's on the store shelves. The good news is, for the bigger issue of Terracycle, what it exposed was that this was a greenwashing scam. It was a marketing ploy to let companies make bad a little bit of money to Terracycle and pretend this stuff was recyclable. And the good news is that I haven't seen any new companies start big programs with Terracycle this year, and a bunch of companies have started to drop off in the US, including Swedish Fish and some others. And I hope that this business goes out of business simply because the brands know, oh, hey, we can't fake people with that anymore. But the bigger issue is actually all these other labels. I got a whole boxes of tricks here that we're bombarded with by this program called How to Recycle, which was invented by the plastics and products industry. They're an NGO and they go, oh, we're an NGO. I'm like, yeah, well, so is the NRA. Okay. You know, that doesn't make you good. And they're labeling all kinds of things that say store drop off. This is the great store drop off charade. I'm now suing these retailers in California, 2 stores that are based in California. That helps with lawsuits. Because the law in California says these plastic bags have to be recyclable in the state in order to be sold, but none of them are recycled. There's almost no take back bins, and the few plastic film processors that exist don't want any colored PET, colored plastic, or contamination. So we filed these 2 lawsuits, and we'll eventually win, and we'll eventually shut down the sales of plastic bags in California, which will hopefully help shut down the whole great store drop-off charade, which is going on across the country. Because we've all been brainwashed with it for so long, like this tooth fairy exists. We're all literally just assuming, oh, if I used to do it, if I put this stuff in a bin somewhere, someone's going to recycle it. Well, we've put trackers in it. It goes to landfill. And again, I know plastic film processors. They don't want this stuff. They don't want contaminated waste. And here's just the example that I found this week. And the worst perpetrator of these greenwashing labels, lying labels, is Walmart, who kind of invented them. They are so bad. How bad are they? They make this little, I've had to buy a lot of sketchy products because I need to have these examples. They make little solar lights for outside that go on steps so you don't trip. Okay, that's a good product. But look, they make that's cardboard in the back, and then this plastic film in the front, and then this tiny plastic bag with some screws in it. Well, they're so desperate to claim that their products are recyclable. On the back, they have all these recycling symbols. Now, what if you're a consumer and you just look at that, you go, hey, don't you just look at that and go, hey, I can throw the whole thing in my recycle bin? It totally contaminates recycle bins by doing that. It says in really, really small letters, this plastic tray, check locally. No MRFs accept this plastic tray in the US. None want this, but they put this word check locally, thinking this is some kind of legal out, and seeing that companies never get prosecuted, they can make this up. And then the most laughable is for this little plastic bag, they say, oh yeah, you can drop this off at a store and it'll get recycled. Okay, how pathetic is that? Well, if they do this, if someone puts us in a recycle bin, here's another one. Like this was pens in this. Again, they say the plastic tray, they have these big recycle symbols, check locally. Well, most people will probably just throw this in the recycle bin. The plastic ends up in the paper bale. Paper bale goes to Indonesia, and this plastic is found in the rivers in Indonesia because it gets tossed out of the paper bales. In fact, the Amazon blue and white, I've lost mine, but you know what they are? Amazon blue and white pouches. My friends in Indonesia find those in the rivers in Indonesia with a how to recycle label on it, because people put them in the recycle bins. They go with cardboard. They get shipped to Indonesia. They pull them out of the pulp plant over there and just trash them into the environment. So there is no recycling of plastics. It's all a charade. It's just a couple tiny little things that it could probably work for, but even that, there's a lot of waste in doing it. We're being told everything's recyclable. We're being told it's our fault that it's not getting recycled. And then the companies are just straight out lying to you. The last example I'm going to give you, green PET. Does everybody know this is actually not recyclable? It's not. To make green, you have to start with clear. But the beverage companies run Super Bowl ads telling us it's our fault that they don't have enough plastic to make back into recycled bottles. And yet on the store shelves, almost 10% of bottles are still green. They willingly not used green in Japan since 2001. There's a law in South Korea that says you can't use green. These things aren't made in green in Japan or South Korea, but they still flood our shelves in the US with non-recyclable green PET bottles. And so with that, let's see. Yep, I'm at about 15 minutes of telling you what gets me up in the morning, what I'm fighting. And my message really is, we all can make a difference. You can tweet, you can write letters. If you only stock in any of these companies, you only have to have $2,000 for 3 years. I have that in Mondelez, the Oreo company. I did a shareholder resolution on them, and I got them to quit Terracycle. You can make an impact. You can make an impact by writing letters, again, tweeting, everything Beyond Plastics is doing in your own communities, demanding that companies be honest at the very least, and then also switch to better packaging. And there's lots of examples of those. So thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I'm really happy to see you're getting results. That's really impressive. Thank you so much. It's very inspirational. And now Megan will talk to us a little bit about the health effects of plastics.
Okay, well, thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Jan. God, who's depressed? Show of hands, who finds this? Okay, yeah. I don't know if anybody managed to watch all 3 films back to back. I've been spacing them out, and they're still very confronting. I actually didn't watch We the Guinea Pigs until just recently, and I still found it confronting, even though I kind of already knew everything in there, but, putting the narratives in. So my experience comes from a lot of places. I work for Beyond Plastics. I'm the policy director there. And my background, my education is public health, and particularly the history of public health and medicine, which usually reflects that major diseases and epidemics happen when human beings start living differently in terms of their environment. So old examples would be like the plague. The medieval plague came because the trade routes opened, and along the trade routes came the rats, and the rats carried the plague into Europe. So there's one. It was a new environmental interaction, and we saw that with COVID, right? Anytime a disease jumps from humans to animals or animals to humans, that's called zoonosis, and or zoonosis. Shoot, I should check that. Anyway, it generally happens when things are living different kinds of proximity, or there's been a big change, and usually things like cholera. The way to stop cholera was to stop putting cholera into the rivers. I.e. stop dumping the sewage into the rivers. So we study the history of medicine in order to inform policy. And in my training and in my work prior to working with Beyond Plastics, I spent a lot of time with historians of toxicology who looked at big business. They looked at things like the lead paint industry, or synthetic turf is another one. Opioids. Where you have businesses that are pumping out dubious products and need to be called to accounting to end what becomes a public health crisis. So it's been very interesting switching over to Beyond Plastics from there, partially because it hasn't been a switch. It's been very much what I was used to, and that took me off guard. Hold on, I'm going to hide my self view because that's much better. I get a little bit mesmerized. I'm sure everybody here on Zoom is used to that at this point. You see yourself in the picture, you're like, wow, I need a haircut. Anyway, this spring, I had the really fortunate experience of getting to go to the World Oceans Convention in Monaco, because they had convened a group of people to put together a definitive paper about plastics and human health. And this is where I learned a lot of what we then saw in We the Guinea Pigs. That we know what's happening in the animal models, and we know that it's not good. And they said in We the Guinea Pigs that, we know that what happens in the animal models eventually happens in humans. And one of the things that really caught my attention at the Monaco Convention particularly, because they were there to study oceans largely, the oceanographers were saying, look, the plastics and human health fight is where we were about 15 years ago. Meaning 15 years ago, we knew the plastics were in the ocean. We had a pretty good idea of where they were, and we had a pretty good idea of how much, but it was guesswork beyond the basics. It's taken 15 years of data collection to start to demonstrate just how toxic plastics have been in marine environments, just how deadly the ghost fishing gear, the microplastics, the plastic soup has been to marine organisms and marine life overall. 15 years of data collection, and now we're able to point to it. So that's what we've got for toxins from plastic and human health. Even while I was at this conference, the finding was produced that plastics are present in human blood. And that raised a few eyebrows at this conference, but pretty much everybody already figured that that was the case. And the only question that then came onto the tables was, well, is it crossing the blood-brain barrier? And those who were studying the blood-brain barrier said, oh yeah. The people who were studying ADHD and autism, absolutely. It's crossing the barrier. There's some time to wait before we have the actual data, but we have it in zebrafish. We have it in the animal models. So this is a major, major thing to be studying. Kind of reminds me of the microbiome about 15 years ago. Everyone started to wake up to the actual impact that gut flora and fauna have on the rest of the body. And this is one of those kind of sea changes. I'm going to share just a few slides here that are my own look at plastics and toxins. Oops, no, that's not the right share. Haha, slideshow. So I wanted to talk for a minute about how the plastics are getting into the human body. We know from we the guinea pigs that, okay, it's exposure. So we know that a lot of it is happening through things like creams, cosmetics, plastics that we touch, plastics that we eat off of, and plastics that break down into very small fragments. This is a slide about microplastics. I don't recall whether any of the three films actually got into microplastics, but microplastics are what result when plastics break down. You'll probably still be reading comments about, oh, plastics, they take hundreds and thousands of years to biodegrade. They do not. They take time to degrade, but they won't biodegrade because they're not bio. They'll fragment into smaller and smaller pieces. The larger ones are called microplastics, and those are about the size of a grain of sand. Tinier than that, you get into nanoplastics, and those are the ones that are showing up in the human bloodstream. We don't know just how small they get. We just know that they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that they continue to maintain all of their plastic properties, meaning they still have all of the chemicals that went into them when they were created, no matter how small they are. So microplastics are worth keeping an eye on as we think about plastics in the human body and on human health. This is a microplastic filament on a snowflake, which is very good for perspective. These kinds of filaments come off of our plastic clothes, which would be things like fleeces, any kind of synthetic polyester material that's made effectively out of a petrochemical is going to be shedding these sorts of plastics, and they get picked up in the hydrocycle. They get evaporated, they wind up in the air, and they wind up being rained back down on literally every corner of the planet, and also taking rides on snowflakes. And this is a slide of a microplastic being caught up in a plant filament. So we also know that they're in the soil and they're going into plants. Plants that have microplastic contamination produce lower yields, but they do still produce yields. And we eat these plants, as does every single other thing in the ecosystem. So that starts to answer some questions about how these are getting into our bodies, aside from just soaking through skin. And this is a slide about some of the foods that we know have microplastics. So bottled water, absolutely. If it's sitting in something plastic, it has microplastic in it. But microplastics have been found in beer, the air we breathe, tap water, seafood, sugar, salt, honey. It is basically in everywhere that we have looked for microplastics, we have found them. That's a picture of a bunny to make you feel better for just a moment. Because this is such a dark subject. It's better to just stop for a second and feel better. Okay, so we also know that they're crossing the placenta. So they're present in the fetus at the time that the fetus is born. And they talked a lot in We the Guinea Pigs about fetal impacts of these plastics. I myself am a mom. Many people are mothers, and it was it was before I joined Beyond Plastics, and I sort of knew a lot of this, and I decided that I had to just stop worrying and love the bomb, and not be too terrified about my own use of plastics. And when my baby was born, she got all the plastic teething toys and all the plastic stuff. The more I learn now, the more it gives me pause, because we know that the chemicals in those plastics maintain their properties and they shed into the human body. So what does all of this mean? And this is just becoming increasingly interesting to me. The more you look at it, the more, well, the darker it gets. So, okay, we know what the plastics are doing in animal models, and we know that that happens in humans. And we know what plastics are made of, and we know the impact of those materials on health. But let's think for a minute about what plastics are made of. So plastics are made from fossil fuels, which is no secret. But there are two things worth thinking about in this regard. Turning petroleum or ethane into a plastic fork or any plastic item isn't just going to happen through temperature or pressure. That takes chemicals, and a lot of them. So the base meaning of the word plastic is malleable. Additives are required to give plastics their stability, their color. Hold on. My phone just went off, which is not a good thing to have happen when you're giving a Zoom presentation. And it's spam. My God. That's so obnoxious. All right, hold on just a sec while I get my slides. Did my my slideshow just go off? Can you still see my slides?
We can still see it.
Okay, so now I have to figure out where did my computer just stash it? Resume share. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so color, flexibility, all of that, it takes additives to such an extent that any given plastic item is about 50% plastic and 50% chemical molecularly. And a very great number of those plasticizers are very bad for living cells. Plastic contains more than 10,000 chemicals, and over 2,400 are considered substances of concern. One of the scientists who was speaking in We the Guinea Pigs was talking about what's called the precautionary principle, which is the idea that if you don't know what it does, you should find out before you put it out into the environment, and particularly before you put it into the human body. And the precautionary principle is generally more alive and well in Europe than it is in the United States. As she said, the companies put out the chemicals, and then it's up to the scientists, the academics, to figure out what those chemicals are doing after they're already out there. So we're not fans of the precautionary principle in practice in the United States, but those 10,000 chemicals where 2,400 are considered substances of concern are a little bit more of a warning that maybe we should be paying a little more attention to the precautionary principle. So plasticizers like bisphenol A and its substitutes, bisphenol S, disrupt signal transmission between nerve cells in the brain. And they talked a lot about that with ADHD and autism. By the way, bisphenol A, all those baby toys that say BPA free, they are BPA free, but they were substituted with a bisphenol from the same family, bisphenol S, which does most of the same things that A does, including to us. So it just hasn't been as rigorously tested, and it doesn't have the same dark shadow on it, but it's doing many of the same things. So we also know that it can be a carcinogen. Well, many of the chemicals that are used are flame retardants because, of course, fossil fuels are highly flammable. That's what keeps our fleece jackets and our Legos and our glasses frames and our rain boots and carpets and couches from bursting into flame is flame retardants. And of course, those are also really, really bad for us and everything around us. A lot of the chemicals in flame retardants are endocrine disruptors, which we heard a lot about. Those trick the body into thinking that they're hormones, and then they disrupt the pathways and the functions that hormones play in our bodies. And there are a lot of those pathways. And this is dark stuff because we know that low doses matter. Low doses matter a lot. So hormones and hormone pathways. Hormones are lipid protein molecules that travel around our bodies and tell our cells what to do. They carry messages and they act like on-off switches. So common hormones include estrogen, testosterone, human growth hormone, and those were all discussed in the movie. When those are disrupted, they affect necessary systems everywhere. Endocrine disruptors can impact hormones that regulate our appetite and our metabolism, so they can cause obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease, all of which are on the uptick. Endocrine disruptors can disrupt brain development, causing lower IQ, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorders, all of which are on the uptick. And endocrine disruptors can cause cancers, especially breast, prostate, and testicular cancers, all of which are on the uptick. They can also cause reproductive problems like early puberty, infertility, and birth defects. So that's the story of plastics and health. And I'm pretty sure it's a story that we're going to be hearing quite a lot more of in the coming, I would say, decade, as we start understanding more and better about what these EDCs, endocrine disruptors, are doing. There is a caveat here, which is the one that's brought forward by the American Chemistry Council, and all of the companies that are creating these chemicals will say, hey, correlation is not causation. We know that we have these chemicals, we see them in the animal models, and they will say the animal models are not human models. It's not the same, it's apples and oranges. It's not apples and oranges. But showing that correlation and causation are the same is very, very, very difficult for epidemiologists. Usually you wind up with somebody at the table who will try to flip the script. For instance, a case of lead poisoning. So the lead paint industry knew as early as 1895 that lead in paint was poisoning children. They knew that it interrupted child development. And instead of taking it out of the paint, it was banned in Australia, but in the United States, the lead industry doubled down and started marketing lead paint to children. The idea was you should paint your nursery with lead paint because it would flake off and it would look clean. You should paint the children's toys with lead paint because you could just wipe them down and they would look clean. So almost 100 years later, you have the toxicologists and the pediatricians still trying to demonstrate in places like Rhode Island that all of this lead paint is causing neurodevelopmental problems in children. And a scientist named Herb Needleman figured out a way to demonstrate this. He started collecting the baby teeth of children all over Rhode Island and analyzing them. And the children that were living in lead-contaminated houses had very high lead levels in their teeth. And the children that were living in other housing stock, newer housing stock, didn't. The children with high lead levels also had lower IQs, higher ADHD, and all of the neurodevelopmental problems that they were looking for in lead-affected children. So they brought this to the court and they said, look, this is it. This is correlation and causation. We can see right here that the lead in the children's teeth from their baby teeth early in their lives is causing these neurodevelopmental problems. And the lawyer for the opposition said, you didn't prove that. All you just proved is that stupid children eat lead paint. That's what we're up against. There are solutions here. As the data piles up and up and up, the state attorneys generals will wind up probably being involved. That's the way that these cases have been won in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the future. There may be other things, but Jan Dell has her finger on the right pulse in terms of taking it to court. Because when you take it to court, not only you'll lose and lose and lose and lose and lose, and then you'll win. And then you'll win and win and win, for instance, with the tobacco companies. But in the meantime, those court cases catch the attention of industry, and they cause industry to start to reel things in and walk it back, take a slightly closer look because they know they're next. All of the companies are watching all of the other companies, and they are looking at market trends, and they're looking at what they now call, they don't talk about shareholders anymore, they talk about stakeholders. Stakeholders are the entire community. So when you have a substance that's impacting the entire community, those stakeholders are likely to get involved and to get loud. And that's you guys, that's me, that's everybody. That's the grassroots. The louder you get, the more of an environment you create for these kinds of cases, and the more pressure you put onto these industries, the more success we're all going to have. So I'll stop speaking from there. I've probably been going on way too long.
That was great, Megan. Thank you so much. I think it's time for a mighty roar from all of us, right? We've all got to hold these corporations accountable. Actually, today I was thinking, let's get trains from all over the country to converge on Atlanta and the Coca-Cola headquarters, and everybody bringing signs about Coca-Cola. It's like, if we could get Coca-Cola to stop making plastic bottles, there's 25% of the plastic pollution problem solved. Anyway, Dana, do you have any questions from the chat that you want to ask directly? I know that Shirley, I don't really know how to pronounce your last name, but Shirley's from Elders Climate Action. She had a question about Terracycle. Maybe Shirley, I'll unmute you and you can ask your question directly.
Hey, Eileen,
Yeah.
quickly before we go to questions,
Yeah.
there have been a couple things mentioned that I want to make sure folks know what exactly we're talking about. So
Okay. Go ahead.
Jan mentioned MRFs a couple of times. So those are material recovery facilities. And I know it's a very technical term, but you know, when we talk about some of the waste stream contamination and why that's an issue and why like plastic bags will literally kind of like gum up machinery, what we're talking about in that case is MRFs. And then PET and HDPE, folks might know this, but we're talking 1 and 2s, which are, I mean, what Megan and Jan and Eileen, somewhat more recyclable, but still the infrastructure isn't there to get anywhere near doing it all. So I just wanted to clarify that for folks in case there's more questions on that recycling and reuse level.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Shirley, do you want to go ahead and ask your Terracycle question? Then I'll start scanning through the chat, which I haven't been looking at that much.
Yeah, I actually have 2 points of view. I'm sitting here listening to Jan talk about, you know, recycling, and I'm knowing in my own experience that the word recycling is very misleading. You know, what the customer thinks is recycling, that the haulers pick up, you know, is one thing. What, you know, people who know a little more about it, what we would like to think is recycling is really not there, because if it isn't reprocessed, then we haven't done anything with it, right? Is that Jan? I see, yes. And so I think we want to be careful about that word. and you know, the haulers are doing what their contract says to do. You know, they have 3 bins, anything that could potentially, and I think that's a very important word, potentially be recovered. See, we got to go to the recovery words, the reprocessing words, get out of the recycling words, you know, because I think it's very misleading. So my second point is that I've been working and sending things back to Terracycle, you know, for 2 years, maybe something like that. So I've been watching this Terracycle thing, as clearly Jan has, and I watched that movie and I went, oh, interesting. Okay. Now, I am also a corporate executive, past corporate executive. So I see it from the inside as well. So I'm looking at that thinking, you know, the correlation between that particular bundle, and we only saw one. Now, there may be more, but the only bundle we saw in that film was of those ones that were pointed out earlier in the film as totally unrecyclable because they were double layered. Is that right? That was that particular bunch of stuff when they opened it up that cannot be. So if I was a corporate executive and I'm looking at this, how do I deal with this? Am I going to try and just, you know, move this out of here? I mean, why they had to move it out of there secretly underground to Bulgaria, which was a huge surprise to me. Because they can't, can they incinerate it? I mean, what's the company? Is it better to try and get it out of the country so that it's somewhere else being incinerated, or do we not want to incinerate? What do they do with those things that really are completely unrecyclable? So that's my thing. I think, you know, that, you know, you made a case, you know, you won your lawsuit, you know, they had to pay you. I think changing, you know, that packaging, a friend of mine just was so proud to bring me all these late July packages. You can put it in the Terracycle box because I keep that going, and I let people bring stuff. You can put it in there. She's so proud of that. You know, it's like a big plus. But how do we help them understand that that's an excuse? Okay. I mean, so anyway, that's my little thing. I feel, and then someone would have to really work hard to prove it wrong to me, that Terracycle is in fact trying to recover and reprocess a lot of stuff. I don't think that, big pens. I got this big thing, big pens. Bees birth bees. I couldn't live long enough. I need 3 lifetimes to collect as much stuff as you would need to send back in a package, right? So I think that's going a little far. But I do question, and I would like to think that the majority of the stuff that they collect is in fact reprocessed in some way. I have talked with the company myself. When your lawsuit first came out, Jan, I talked with the company myself, with their representative. I'm not the president.
Okay, Shirley, let's let Jan respond. Thanks.
Okay, on your first point, yeah, I agree about using the word recycle. It's just an oversimplification. And I would love, when I write about it and I discuss it, I talk about, the steps of it. Number 1, for plastic waste, you have to collect it. That's impossible. It's a Humpty Dumpty situation. There's trillions of pieces of little plastic. We can't get them all back, okay? And only 56% of Americans have access to curbside bins. So that just rules out, 44% there. And then the second thing is you have to sort it, because plastic isn't like paper. You can't mix it all together. And then someone has to want to buy it and reprocess it, which came up in the questions about green PET. Here's the deal. Once plastic has been used, nobody wants it back. On a very rare situation, do they want a clear PET back and a milk jug back? Okay, milk jugs are natural. They can be made into orange Tide containers, and Procter & Gamble can tell us they have recycled content. Those orange containers they're making, hardly recyclable. Maybe you can make some pipe out of it. Okay, I completely agree. We have to simplify that, and it's really hard to communicate to the public. But when we write articles about it, about the steps of it and why it doesn't work, we break it down. The second part about Terracycle, I'm sorry, there's going to be another big report coming out in September. They're not recycling it in the US, okay? And I know this is being taped, so I can't give you all the details. But I have had, and by the way, I get no money out of suing. I get 0. My attorney gets paid back. I volunteer all my time. I gave up a pretty big six-figure salary to do this, and I do not get paid. In fact, Terracycle tried to pay me off along the way, and I went, I don't want a dime of your money. Yeah, we can put something in the negotiation where she can, check us. I'm like, hey, I don't want a dime of your money. Okay, but in the US, I can tell you this, I have had recyclers pop up around the country emailing me, thanking me for exposing this scam. Recyclers who spend their careers actually trying to recycle bottles and jugs, who are trying to be honest. I had one from Michigan email me and say she knows that Terracycle bought up warehouse space and has been storing this crap for years.
Really?
Yes. And we asked them for proof, okay, in the US. We asked them for proof. If they could prove, he was saying it's 100% recyclable. I wish I brought more crap from the garage to show examples of what they were doing. We said, prove it. If they could prove it, he could put that on the label, but he couldn't prove it. And in fact, part of the negotiation was that they were going to have to implement a supply chain certification to actually show where stuff goes, because they couldn't show where a bale went. And let me be clear about this.
Well, she got too excited. Anyway, I'm
giving in the UK, already been who had already been caught by the EPA over there, and lost their recycling license. That was the company that they were using.
Oh, really?
And the biggest thing to step back and think about is their greenwashing. Well, there's two big things. Is their greenwashing bad packaging? Okay, this doesn't have to exist. All right, bad packaging. You can innovate to paper packaging. You can innovate. Already we're seeing, I just saw something come out about a blister pack that's all paper, it's all recyclable. And the quote from the producer is, oh yeah, this technology has existed for a while, but plastic was cheaper. It's only now that people don't want to see plastic that we're going to finally use a technology that exists, okay? So they're greenwashing these horrible products, these Febreze bottles with a number 7 that have no recycling at all.
Right.
They're greenwashing that this is recyclable instead of making Procter & Gamble change the design so it's PET and you could put it in the recycle bin. And then the last aha that you have to look at, which is the document that Beyond Plastics and I produced in June of last year, was the carbon footprint of the whole model of mailing stuff back to a warehouse in New Jersey. This is insanity. We did the carbon footprint. If to mailing this was like 20,000 cars, if everybody mails these back, it's equivalent of 20,000 cars on the road per year. They're putting it in boxes and putting it on a US UPS truck and sending it to New Jersey, where then it goes to secret we don't know.
Bulgaria.
After that,
So guys,
I think Indonesia. So just
Jan, can I interrupt for a sec?
Thank you, Jan. I'm beginning to believe you.
Yeah.
okay.
All right.
I'm just outraged that this has gone on, but there's another report coming out in September, which I hope exposes it all.
Okay.
There's a very related question in the chat from Elaine that said it's so clear that barely nothing that we're trying to recycle is actually getting recycled. So is it naive to ask, why doesn't the government crack down? How can we advocate to hold our state reps responsible? So ultimately, I think a lot of this is at the bottom, corporate regulatory capture, right? So I'd be interested to hear from some advocates and anyone regarding why doesn't the government crack down, and what do we do to hold as advocates to hold state reps responsible? Or the question of state reps particularly, but on any level.
I'll just say that I'm very frustrated because I've seen these things are illegal. They don't match the FTC law. I didn't want to sue. It's the last thing I want to do. I wrote to the companies. I tried to talk with them via Greenpeace, showed them the facts, say, hey, you guys are lying, or whatever. They lie because no legal authority comes in and says and cracks down on. US FTC, who's in charge of them, has never filed investigation on a recycling label. I think it's just the bottom of the pyramid that nobody cares about. There's so many bigger social issues. I actually hope they take on the toxics issues before the recycle label issues. Oh my God, Megan, I'm like, oh, my mind's blown. I mean, do that first, right? They have to take on food safety, all these other things. The good news is in California, we passed a law called SB 343, which should be coming into effect, which will make it a criminal offense to have a bad label, although it still has to get enforced, which could be a problem. But I do, and actually kudos to the Connecticut State Attorney General, who just filed a lawsuit against Hefty Bags about some of their claims. So if anybody is motivated in their state to take some of these examples to district attorneys or state attorney generals, we are beginning to see action.
Yeah, and also certain states, like in Massachusetts right now, we have an expanded bottle bill before the state legislature. There are EPR, extended producer responsibility bills in front of a lot of different states, and it's a big push with Beyond Plastics to get really good EPR legislation written. And we in Massachusetts are also trying to pass a statewide single-use plastic shopping bag ban. I know Dana wanted to talk a little bit about why that is so hard in Missouri. But so do you want to talk about that now, Dana? But I also like to get to some of the health questions and also talk about environmental justice, which Ethan brought up. And I will agree with Ethan that the guide for Terracycle is very sketchy. Yeah.
I was writing a quick response to Ethan's last point about environmental justice, and I'd also be interested in hearing what Megan has to say about the advocacy end of things. Eileen just brought up Missouri is in a different situation. We're a preemption state, which means that our state legislature has enacted a ban on bans. So no town or county or any like municipal subdivision of any kind is allowed to enact a plastic bag ban. Here in Missouri, there is also often legislation sponsored that would expand that to all types of packaging materials. So we have to like get that out of the way before we could even work on plastic bag bans. So it's a challenging situation, and there are other states that are in our boat too. So Megan, do you have any comments regarding like, the advocacy? not Missouri specifically, but
yeah, I mean, I'm holding back. The meta answer to why we don't have a better recycling system is, again, the corporate lobby. Bottling companies, in particular, beverage companies, lobby very, very hard to keep recycling, to keep things like bottle bills out of states, because then they would actually have to put money and resources into recollecting and reutilizing the materials that they put out. So Coca-Cola switching from glass to plastic was a massive money saver for them. Plastic is so much cheaper. What winds up happening across the board in environmental fights is the companies consider the costs of cleaning up any kind of pollution that they generate as an externality. It's something that they would be responsible for, but they're not, because they're able to make it outside of their corporate model. So for instance, roads are an externality. If you want to ship a bunch of Twinkies from one side of the country to another, you're going to have some pretty good roads to do that. Well, who pays for the roads? Well, we do. So we're supporting, the shipping of goods in that way. Recycling is very, very similar. We pay the cost of recycling. Whenever governments, towns, anyone, anywhere steps in and says, wait a minute, should the tax holder be holding the literal and figurative bag on this one? That's when the lobbyists get very involved. It's easy to sound like you're wearing a tinfoil hat when you say, like, no, the reason that this isn't happening is because corporations won't let us. But there is a vast, vast history. This is the way in which bills are made and passed, is that they are actually written by lobbyists quite a lot of the time and handed to the various elected officials who are willing to put them forward. Beyond Plastics has its own model bills that we also are very happy to hand to elected officials. But it's a question of how much persuasion are you putting behind your bottle bill, or any bill. Ours is a bottle bill. But whatever model bill, how persuasive are you to your elected official? Are you persuasive to the tune of a whole lot of money for their campaign? Or are you persuasive to the tune of 10,000 signatures? The dollar will probably move harder than the signatures will, frankly. That's the way that American democracy works. So that's the answer, to my answer at least, to why is the recycling system not better? What was the next question? There are so many questions.
There was a question about policy, but while we're just talking about this, I want to mention to everybody that Beyond Plastics is sponsoring a nationwide plastic packaging take back action on July 23rd. It's a Saturday where people are encouraged to go to their local grocery store, hopefully a large chain grocery store, with some plastic packaging, and demanding that the corporate headquarters change the amount of plastic packaging they're using. Many of you probably already know that plastics is the plan B for the fossil fuel industry, as they see transportation and housing becoming more and more fuel efficient. So that is why we've decided to focus on the plastic packaging that we're seeing in supermarkets. It is growing exponentially every year. So if anybody's interested in doing that, contact Beyond Plastics. Alexis Goldsmith and Megan are actually heading up that campaign. And if you're in Greater Boston on July 20th, which is a Wednesday, our group, Beyond Plastics Greater Boston, is going to be holding a rally action in March in downtown Boston. We're starting at the State House at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, July 20th. We will be going to the corporate headquarters of Trader Joe's and doing a little plastic take back action there. And then we're going to end up with a die-in near South Station. So live theater, lots of art, music. I hope that some of you can join us if you're in the Boston area. Easy to get to because we're going to end up at South Station. So if like you're in Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, you can get there easily. That's my plug for my action. And do we have, Dana, are there any more questions you want to address, or should we go to environmental justice? Should we talk, Megan, do you want to talk about environmental?
Yeah, I have plenty of commentary on environmental justice and plastics. Generally, so plastics affect all of us. They're not very discriminating once they get out there. But the two places that you see the injustice the most glaringly are at the point of production and the point of retirement. I don't know. There's no end to plastic. There's no biodegradation. There's no real disposal. But at the beginning and the so-called end of its life cycle, you see a lot of stuff. So I'll just show you like 2 slides from the end of the life cycle, which we're calling at this point waste colonialism, which is, you know, the concept of shipping all of this so-called recyclable material offshore to places that we imagine, I guess, could potentially recycle it, but really can't. So this is 2021 waste exports from the US. And you see actually a lot of it going to Canada, which sounds kind of nice. Like, okay, Canada is going to be able to handle, you know, late July bags or something like that. But actually, no, Canada is going to, oops, sorry about that. Canada is going to re-export a lot of this to the developing world. Other places that the United States is sending a lot of stuff: Mexico, Malaysia, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey. El Salvador is one of the biggest growing quote unquote markets for plastic waste. And that's the idea here, that this is somehow an extension of the rag and bone pickers of yore, you know, the people who would be able to salvage materials and find some way of repurposing or getting it down to some kind of a something that can be used. You know, the poor do that. And so, okay, well, we'll sell them these bales of plastic materials. Oftentimes, these are imported on the basis that maybe they have some 1s and 2s in them. But these are not countries that have extra sophisticated recycling plants. You know, Taiwan, well, I don't know, but El Salvador, Indonesia, Vietnam, these are countries that have a lot of waste pickers who will go through, and then the extra materials wind up going into their own waste disposal, which if you happen to live in a place like India or Vietnam, there's not a lot of Department of Sanitation action coming to every neighborhood. The way in which a lot of things are disposed of in a lot of places is, well, you put it into the river, and the river carries it away. So there was a bunch of I don't know, noise, I guess you could call it, a few years back, when it was noted that an awful lot of the marine debris, the plastic trash in the oceans, was actually coming from developing contexts. And a number of people in the United States and other developed areas decided to say, well, that just shows you that we're not the polluters. You know, look at them over there in Asia and Africa. They're the polluters. But that's not really what's happening. What's happening is that these bales of plastics are being exported to these countries that do not have sanitation systems, period, much less fancy recycling plants, and they wind up in the river systems and they wind up in the ocean that way. So that's the end game with waste colonialism. And then the beginning game, sorry, I could have just cruised right through and you could have all seen all the other slides in that presentation. Let me just switch screens real briefly here. Not that one. The other end of it is when it is produced, where is it produced, and how is it produced? And that is a tale told in the United States and many other places, but specifically the US right now. So let me share my screen again. And this is also the why now of plastics. Why is this happening now is what historians like to ask. You know, we've had plastics for decades and decades and decades, but half of all the plastic in existence today was manufactured in the last 15 to 20 years. So what happened in the last 15 to 20 years that gave us millions and millions and millions of tons of plastics? The answer to that is actually fracking. Which I am so bored by the fracking. I don't want to hear about it. I want to talk about pandas and marine mammals, but fracking is where we go to. So when fracking occurs, water is pumped down into the aquifer and it fractures the rock, and the rock releases gas, and the gas goes up, and ethane gas is a byproduct of this. Ordinarily, ethane, which of course we all know is also a massive greenhouse gas, would be flared, meaning when it comes up to the top in fracking, it's just burned off. It's a byproduct. It's the squeal of the pig. When you can, you know, make a sausage out of everything else, this is the squeal. We can't do anything with it. A decade and a half ago, it was discovered that you could do something with it. You could send it along to what we now call an ethane cracker plant, and this is what one looks like. People just refer to them as cracker plants. They're not making Ritz, they're not making wheat thins here. What they're doing is superheating the ethane molecules until they crack. And when they do that, they create a new feedstock called ethylene, which is extremely good for making single-use plastics. It's really good for plastic film. It's really good for plastic bags. It's really good for the supposedly disposable containers that, like Glad containers, things like that. So suddenly there's this massive, massive surfeit of ethylene on the market that could potentially be turned into something saleable. And that is the point at which we see the plastic uptick. All of a sudden, everything is wrapped in plastic. All of a sudden, everything has a disposable version that's incredibly cheap. And it's because this has become the plan B for the petrochemical industry that sees which way the wind is literally blowing. It sees that fossil fuels may not be the future of energy, but plastic is. Now, of course, these are super emitters, these ethane cracker plants. They're just as bad as all the other parts of the petrochemical creation cycle. And of course, whoops, where is it? Sorry about that. I'm looking, there we are. This is where they are. Where they are is generally places where people can't afford to fend them off, and also where there are water sources. So Appalachia has been hit hard. The Ohio River Valley, generally, lots and lots and lots of new ethane cracker plants going in there. And of course, Texas and Louisiana. The statistics on this, there are some towns where basically nobody lives more than 1 mile from an ethane cracker plant, and 90% of the people in those towns are generally people of color. There is no equitable distribution to this. In Louisiana, it's called Cancer Alley, but it's already been very well documented that Cancer Alley is now also in the Ohio River Valley. And that's another of the things that you'll see in the health news in the coming probably decade. So that was some cheery news about waste colonialism and environmental injustice in the plastics industry. But it's those two end pieces that hit people of color and people who are financially underserved the hardest.
Thank you,
thanks.
Megan. That was an awesome summary. If any of,
I have one thing quick.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I put in a link. People should copy it, save it, like it, and watch it later. But this is on this environmental justice issue around plastic recycling and the myth that they've created, plastic decking. It sounds so green, right? Oh, they take plastic films. By the way, they don't take plastic bags, but they take plastic wrap from the back of stores and stuff, and they make it into decking like Trex. Well, there's the story that I saw in Arkansas of this poor woman where this factory right behind her house, they're recycling this stuff and it's spewing, they're grinding it, spewing onto her kids' playground equipment, and they can't even go out there, and it's horrific. And this is a company that when you go to their website and look at it, they look really green, like they're making plastic decking and it's all good. And they finally get some Arkansas inspector to kind of look, and it's horrible what you see. You think you're looking at Indonesia or Malaysia, and it's America. And woe be to anyone who wants to live next to any kind of plastic recycling facility. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to on an environmental issue. If Ellen MacArthur doesn't want to live next to a plastic recycling facility, she shouldn't say that anybody else should have to too. That's my motto. And that's true for the American Chemistry Council and everywhere else. They have huge environmental impacts. They're huge fire hazards. They're on fire all the time, and it's not clean or green. Check out that link and you're going to think differently about these clean, green plastic products that were being sold. Thanks.
Thanks, Jan. That happens in a couple other industries too, where the proponents of the thing do not live anywhere near the thing. And it typically is located in places where people simply don't have the financial and political power to fight back, right? I just wondered if any of you wanted to comment on, speaking of like waste colonialism, on the increase in the marketing of sachets or sachets to the same developing nations that Megan was showing slides upon.
There was just a Reuters about that. I'm dropping it into the chat.
Thank you.
Who saw it? Do you want me to describe what's going on with that situation?
That would be great. That would be great. Thank you.
I mean, the basic idea is you have people who are, living hand to mouth, who can't very easily afford something like a bottle of shampoo, but they might have, 2 or 3 cents at a time, and they could afford, one of those like ketchup sized little packets that has shampoo in it. And there are many, many countries in the world and many, many people in the world who live hand to mouth this way. And this is another way in which companies like Procter & Gamble have discovered that they can actually make quite a bit more money if they package smaller portions of items like shampoo, and they sell them in those incremental versions. It doesn't cost them really anything at all to use the plastic packaging to create that. And they're able then to leverage the demand of people who would otherwise have to steward their money very carefully and buy at very specific moments if they bought at all, which has resulted, of course, in an incredible cascade of these plastic sachets in all the parts of the world that have no facilities whatsoever for dealing with them. And they wind up in the waterways more than anything else. Those that don't wind up in the waterways very frequently wind up in the fire pits. Plastic is a good fuel source because it's a petrochemical, hence the need for all the flame retardants. Of course, if you stand next to a burning plastic bag or a burning, ketchup sachet or whatever else, you know that you shouldn't be breathing that stuff in. But it's cheap, it's available, and it's abundant. So if it's not in the waterways, it's probably in the air.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that in the Coca-Cola Plastics Promises too. The burning of plastics, so toxic, especially to children. All right. Well, we're at 8:25 on the East Coast. We're 25 past the hour. Are there any other issues, Dana, you'd like to address, or Megan or Jan, before we finish up?
I want to say something about joy.
Okay.
It's kind of, this is overwhelming, right? Like, the term climate grief was coined not too long ago, and there's a there, and like, I like to watch, National Geographic specials with my daughter, who's 7, who just floated through, and she doesn't like watching them anymore because they're too depressing, because there's always the part about, well, this doesn't really exist in the wild anymore, and so on and so on. And there are a couple of antidotes to climate grief. Everybody has their own way of dealing with the giant bummer that is all of this. I'm one of those people that likes to know more. I would rather just have the whole picture and be horrified head to toe and then get angry. And I take a lot of energy from that anger, but also a lot of gallows humor. There's a lot of whistling past the graveyard that kind of goes on. And I like to spend time with people like Eileen and Dana and Jan, because they know things, they're funny, and they have a lot of energy and a lot of anger too. And I think the four of us probably don't look like we're boiling over with rage, because spending time with community and other people who share what you're feeling is really the way to find peace. If you can find humor, you can find peace. The movie that came out that had Leonardo DiCaprio and everybody else in it about the meteor, Don't Look Up, that's the kind of gallows humor that people who get very heavily involved in causes like this kind of need. So I just want to say to all of you, there is actual purpose in joining a Beyond Plastics chapter or any other, 350 climate, whatever. Just being around other people who care, who see what you see, and are going to bring a plate of cookies to the meeting actually has an enormous amount of value, especially when they can help you figure out how to make yourself feel like you're making a difference. Self-actualization, who to write to, even if it's only one tiny little letter in the scheme of things, how to rage tweet at a corporation, at Procter & Gamble, why are you doing this? And then a photo of whatever horrible thing this is. That's the kind of stuff that actually makes you feel better. And amazingly enough, it also works politically. It works. It doesn't feel like you're being heard, but you are being heard. Your citizen action is so much more powerful than your dollar action. Just not buying a product because it's in the wrong packaging isn't really going to move the needle, but writing that letter, getting that letter signed by a few other friends, sending that tweet, carrying that sign, it actually really does make a difference. So try to find joy wherever you can find it. It's out there. It's a weird needle to thread between being horrendously angry and rather depressed and also goofball, but it's kind of how it works. It's how these things happen.
Yeah, I'm actually optimistic. I'm outraged because there's solutions that they could switch to. I'm actually optimistic that when people know, they'll take the reusable bag and we'll switch to things. In France, of course we should use reusables at Starbucks, but we can't always. In France, they make them use fiber lids. I know this company that's making fiber. It's healthy. It's recycled waste material. It's all really good. And you can buy frozen food things in those now instead of plastic. There's really good options, and I'm really optimistic actually that we can change a lot of this. And we all just have to get out there and get loud and demand better stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, we have the numbers on our side. We have all the people on our side. There's only 10 corporations, okay? We can do this, right? All right, before we conclude, I see my friend Cecily has a question. She's got her hand up. Do you want to quickly say something?
I just wanted to say I'm working on this project that's to raise visibility and awareness about plastic, and Eileen has been a fantastic ally. But I have noticed, talking to all these little kids who come to our workshops, they know a lot about this. Like, there are times I start, blah, 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 and they're like, I know, and they are so articulate and have facts, and so they're learning this somewhere. I've been really impressed. These are like elementary school kids, and actually Ringe, our high school, our local high school, has really joined in on this too. So it's another place where we, there's going to be youth leadership, and that's been very heartening for me.
Yeah, and I like the quotation Connie put in the chat from Rebecca Solnit. I also like her one that says the revolution won't happen by people staying home and being good. All right, so get out there, do stuff, have fun, put the social back in social action. Cecily and I will make sure you have a lot of fun if you come to Boston, right? All right, thank you so much, everybody. Dana, are you still on the call? Oh, yeah, there you are. So thanks for watching the movies. If you haven't watched them yet, you still have time to watch them. They are really powerful, and I'm recommending them to everybody. So,
Megan and Jan, thank you so much for joining us. Eileen,
of course,
lovely working with you.
Yeah. The three of us were like on calls all summer last summer. So
it's true.
And Tamala was on too. And I don't know, is Raksha on still?
She was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a bunch of us who are the speakers are on the call tonight. So.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good
Best
night.
of luck with
Good night,
everything you're
everybody.
working
Good night,
on.
Eileen.
Good
Good night,
night.
Megan. Good night.